Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we stay with diplomatic efforts by the Biden administration here in this part of the world. Now, for more on the U.S. presidential delegation's Asia trip, I have Donald KIRK here in the studio. Donald, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Good to see you again.
I also have Kosuke Takahashi live on the line. Kosuke, it's also been a while with you. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Right, we'll start here in the studio then. Donald, you covered the summit here in Seoul. What would you say were the highlights of the summit between Presidents Yoon and Biden?
Well, frankly, the point that really remains with me most vividly is that they talked about resuming joint U.S. ROK, Republic of Korea exercises, military exercises, on the ground, in the air, and at sea. Now, in recent years, ever since the Singapore summit between former President Trump and Kim Jong-un, there have been only computer game exercises, joint exercises, that is. That's a very important move. U.S. commanders believed it was really vital that U.S. and ROK troops train together, that they coordinate together. They say that they really have to be on the ground or in the air or at sea together. They want live exercises and live fire exercises. So that, to me, that's the most important takeaway from the summit. Obviously, there were other important issues too, and notably economic, by the way. But nonetheless, that's what really sticks with me.
Right. And Kosuke, what were some of the notable takeaways from the meeting between President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida back on Monday?
Most of all, two leaders agreed to boost the deterrence of the two nations alliance. This is very important because there have been a lot of anxiety about U.S. commitment to defense of Japan since Russia invaded Ukraine in late February. In particular, there have been growing concern in Tokyo that U.S. cannot deal with nuclear powers such as Russia, China, and North Korea directly. Security concerns has been spreading in Japan, but Biden promised to provide the extended deterrence for Japan. This is very helpful in preventing China from invading disputed Senkaku Islands in East China Sea. Sunny.
Right. And Donald, you were at the joint press conference held by Presidents Yoon and Biden this past Saturday. First of all, what was the hall there like compared to the media venue in Cheongwon?
Okay. I'm going to have to make a small correction. I watched the entire press conference closely on none other than Arirang TV, which had excellent coverage and excellent commentary before and after.
Right, thank you for your kind words then.
I was not in the room, but I saw the room thanks to Arirang. So again, obviously the atmosphere was rather tense at the beginning. They delayed opening it, you know. People were waiting and waiting and fidgeting around. And finally they opened it maybe half an hour after they said they would. And the leaders, the presidents, made rather pro forma statements. And then they only took a couple of questions, you know, 2 or 3 questions. It was rather brief. There were many more questions that people could have asked. There was a very interesting question at the end from a woman asking about gender equality. I think that threw President Yoon a little off balance, to tell you the honest truth. I don't think he was totally prepared for that question. It was a good question, a great question, a relevant question. And it was good to see a little something out of the ordinary in the press conference.
Right. And Kosuke, what can you share with us about the overall atmosphere during the press conference there in Tokyo following the summit between President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida?
I participated in online media briefing last night. The atmosphere was very warm and relaxing. There was no tough questions and not so many questions from reporters. I think media fully understand that China is a subtext during Biden's visit to Japan. And Biden came here to reaffirm U.S. commitment to the Indo-Pacific region. And by the way, Japanese TV station and news media reported a lot about what kind of food and drinks were served to Biden at lunch and dinner yesterday. Sunny?
Right, I see. And Donald, here among the local media in South Korea, quite a bit of significance has been attached to the fact that President Yoon's first summit with his U.S. counterpart took place less than a fortnight into office. Has this reality also been touched upon by the foreign media?
Well, to a certain extent. I think it's extremely important, frankly, that the president of the ROK should meet the president of the U.S. so soon after his inauguration, that is, President Yoon's inauguration. It was incredible timing, and it comes in the midst of the COVID crisis in North Korea, and it comes in the midst of the Ukraine invasion by Russia. So there was a lot to say very quickly into President Yoon's term. It's also significant that that President Yoon obviously is charting a considerably different policy from that of President Moon, and he really wants to strengthen relations with the U.S. And to get this going so soon after his inauguration, I think was vital, frankly.
Right. And Kosuke, there's also been a bit of attention here on the local front, that is, that Mr. Biden's trip to Asia began in South Korea. Has this particular reality also been addressed by pundits there in Japan?
Mm-hmm. I know this is related to strong historical rivalry between Japan and South Korea, but in Japan, it is widely viewed Biden visited Seoul at first because the Australian federal election was held on Saturday, and Biden couldn't come to Japan at first because there was still Australian election going on and couldn't hold the Quad summit much earlier in Tokyo. Japan and US had to wait for Australian new prime minister to be elected to hold the Quad meeting. So not so much focus on this issue in Japan.
Right, I see. Now, Donald, before I ask you this next question, let's take a quick look at this very short clip first.
Hello. Period. Thank you.
Right, now, Donald, that was President Biden's message to North Korea's Kim Jong-un. When asked by a reporter what message he would like to give the North Korean leader, he said, hello, period. How do you interpret this curt address?
Well, right off the bat, I would interpret it as a put-down of former President Trump, who actually claimed that he and Kim Jong-un fell in love. He kept on saying that during their summit in Singapore, which was ridiculous because really the statement that they issued in Singapore said nothing. It talked about everybody wanting denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which doesn't mean anything as far as North Korea is concerned. It's just talk. So I think that it's very important that President Biden, in his own way, a low-key way, without mentioning President Trump by name, really threw out the relationship between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. It made it very clear that he had a different view and a different overall opinion about how to deal with Kim Jong-un.
Right. Donald, also speaking to reporters in Tokyo, Mr. Biden claimed that the U.S. would militarily defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. Now, pundits say that such remarks may serve to encourage, prompt that is, instead of deter Chinese aggression against Taiwan. What are your thoughts?
Not really, frankly. I don't quite agree with that. I think it's rhetoric. Obviously, China's going to object strongly to anybody saying that anyone's going to defend Taiwan against China. Taiwan, after all, by acknowledgement of President Biden, is a province of China. So I don't think that President Biden really went that far beyond what other U.S. leaders have been saying for years. But I do think that I don't think that China is really going to react beyond the statements from the foreign ministry and beyond the usual bluff and bluster.
Right. Kosuke, aside from regional security here in South Korea, there was much focus also on economic security. That being said, how are observers in Japan assessing the significance of the Indo-Pacific economic framework for this particular region?
Here in Tokyo, there is much focus on economic security as well. First of all, China has implemented economic coercion against Japan, such as rare earth export restrictions in the past. Japan is aiming at warding off so-called China risks, especially in time of the emergency. Secondly, economic security is becoming a new arena in great power competition between US and China. The US is Japan's only ally, so we need to be American side in any way, Sunny.
Right. Kosuke, I have an impromptu question here. I understand that Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has urged President Biden to partake in the CPTPP. What are the prospects on that front?
Okay. The Japan is very careful about the China's assertive action behaviors in terms of the economic and military. So, the Kishida Fumio is trying to be a strong man aside with the US, especially this is ahead of the upper house election in July. He tried to be a respected statesman in Japan now. So anyway, he needs to unite with the Biden closely. He's giving us such kind of impression now.
Right, I see. And Donald, with regard to security here on the Korean Peninsula, much depends on North Korea's future actions, of course. So do you suppose its ongoing battle against the pandemic could perhaps serve as another opportunity for dialogue and diplomacy?
Well, I would say that I would hope it would, but I mean, there's no guarantees. After all, North Korea has not responded to President Biden or to President Yoon's offer of aid. They're not so far. They're not saying anything. They're getting whatever outside aid they're getting from China. So and their medical system is really decrepit anyway. They don't want foreigners or people from South Korea or from anywhere looking around their country too closely and seeing what's going on and seeing how bad their people are being treated and seeing how awful is their medical system. Despite all the talk that we hear, all the articles that are put out by KCNA, the Korean news agency, Korean Central News Agency. So I don't think that North Korea is going to be able to do that much while fighting the pandemic, but some people think North Korea is still getting ready for another missile test, maybe even a seventh nuclear test, which is incredible. I would hope that they would sort of postpone or abandon that idea, but there are no guarantees. It's hard to predict what Kim Jong-un is going to do.
Right. Donald, while Washington has said that the door to diplomacy is open with North Korea, the concern here in this part of the world is that the Biden administration may adopt or reinstall, that is, the strategic patience policy with North Korea. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the door is always open, even during the era of strategic patience when President Obama was in office. The door is open. If North Korea wants to talk, the U.S. will talk. But the U.S. will not agree in advance to doing away with sanctions or to other measures that that North Korea wants the U.S. to guarantee beforehand. Before they even talk, the U.S. wants North Korea wants the U.S. to do away with sanctions and take other steps. So the U.S. is not going to agree to that. But obviously, the U.S. will sit down and talk anytime. That doesn't mean the talks are going to get anywhere, and it certainly doesn't mean that North Korea is going to say, okay, we'll talk. Maybe, though, there will be talks. There could be the usual run-up to talks, the usual diplomatic interchange, then they sit down at a table and come out with some kind of agreement, which North Korea inevitably violates or doesn't live up to in the end.
Right. Kosuke, meanwhile, what has been disclosed thus far about the Quad summit there among the leaders of Japan, the US, India, and Australia, of course?
There are two main focuses on the Quad meeting in Tokyo today. Number one, Australia's new Prime Minister Albanese affirmed to the nation's commitment to Quad, even if the administration changed. His Labour Party was viewed as being very soft on China, but he today showed a strong, tough stance against China. Number two, India's Prime Minister Modi emphasized the strength of our democracy and free and open Indo-Pacific. India has been very soft on Russia, so the US and Japan are trying to retain India in the camp of the free world. But India is very clever. This just could be a balanced diplomacy today. Sunny.
Right, I see. And Donald, back here in South Korea, the country has joined, of course, the Regional Economic Trade Pact, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, but it has yet to join the Quad Summit, and there is talk about whether it should or it should not. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think South Korea wants to remain aloof from the Quad, frankly. I think that there's really no reason they should join the Quad except to gang up on China. Well, why should South Korea gang up on China? South Korea has huge trade relations with China. There's huge South Korean investment in China. So it really behooves South Korea to try to get along with China without giving up their own integrity, without compromising on the alliance with the U.S., and without sort of asking the U.S. to withdraw the THAAD missiles that are down there way south of Seoul. So I think that South Korea really is doing the right policy in saying, well, okay, the Quad is great, but we'll sort of watch it without joining it.
Right. Kosuke, U.S. President Joe Biden has claimed that security and stability within this particular region will depend on the relationship among, that is, South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. Do you see your prospects for the future with regard to South Korea and Japan's relationship? What are your thoughts?
Frankly speaking, Japanese government still not trust the South Korean new government a lot yet. Because previously, looking back, the Lee Myung-bak administration, Park Geun-hye administration, both conservative party administration, right? But they finally turned into the little bit anti-Japanese policies at the end. So Japan tried to figure out the exact policy of the new Yoon administration's stance against Japan. So I think Japan is still very cautious about the new administration, I think.
So
yes.
It's still watching then?
Still watching, yes. Watching the exact policy.
Right. And one final question to you, Donald, before we wrap up today. What are your thoughts so far with regard to the Yoon administration and its handling of diplomatic affairs?
Well, I think it's doing quite well. By the way, the foreign minister, Park Jin, I've known him off and on for years. And he's a very smooth guy. He's a good talker, and he's quite sympathetic with the U.S. ROK alliance for sure. So I think that was a good move, and it would be very interesting to see how foreign policy evolves under Mr. Park. I tried to reach him and ask him a couple of questions. I actually had his phone number. He very politely said he couldn't comment to me, which I appreciate. And I'm not going to bother him with more such phone calls. But I hope to see him from time to time in press conferences and briefings and so forth. I think that the U.S. ROK alliance could progress quite well under Mr. Yoon. I think that they're going to strengthen some issues. They're going to strengthen the military cooperation, and they're going to see more closely how to deal with North Korea. One thing that no longer is on the table is the idea of a peace agreement or end of war agreement, peace treaty or end of war agreement with North Korea. President Moon pushed very hard for that. I'm sure he was very disappointed that nothing ever came of it. I don't think it was a good idea. It wasn't viable, and I don't think we're going to hear a lot about that again until or unless there's a change in policy and a change in administration 5 years hence, which, you know, is very hard to predict.
Right, it is. All right, Donald, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Kosuke, over in Japan, thank you for being with us today.
대단히 감사합니다.